everybody. I am Mary Fitzpatrick. I'm the Assistant Dean for the Career and Professional Development Center at Albany Law School. And this afternoon, we're hosting a program on designing postgraduate fellowships and navigating the application process, which can often seem a little intimidating to students, we know. And so I'm very pleased this afternoon to be able to be joined by Lauren DesRosiers, Peter Calloway, and John Peng, all of whom have experience in navigating the process. We're going to record today's program for anybody who is not able to join us so that you can get the valuable information. And at the end of our talk, we're going to invite our participants and students who are here with us today to ask any questions they may have, either by unmuting and asking directly of the panelists the question they have, or just posting it in the chat. All right, so with that, Lauren, do you want to give us a little bit of a background in terms of your fellowship experience?
Sure. So I'm Lauren DesRosiers. I am a senior staff attorney with the Immigration Law Clinic, and I also teach immigration law. I had an Equal Justice Works fellowship. I was a little different in my application cycle because I actually went and worked for a firm before I got my fellowship. So normally students would apply during the school year and then get the fellowship as their first job after law school. I was a little different. I went to a firm, applied for a fellowship, and then once I got the fellowship, I had about half a year before I was going to start. But I was employed at a firm during that time. It was a chaotic experience, but it was a lot of fun, and I was able to kind of pull on a lot of the different connections that I'd made over the years, doing the things that I was interested in to kind of build out the program that I wanted to work on for the 2 years of my fellowship. I had an Equal Justice Works fellowship, and that is a great program, and they have a lot of different fellowships within their umbrella. It's not just the Design Your Own fellowship. They have a crime victims core fellowship. They have emergency response fellowships, and a lot of them are a lot broader than you would think. So those are great opportunities to explore.
Super, thank you so much, Lauren. Peter, can we hear a little bit about the fellowship that you did and when you did it in your career?
Sure. So right now, I'm a visiting associate professor of clinical law at George Washington Law School in the Criminal Defense and Justice Clinic. Actually just started a couple months ago. And before that, I was in San Francisco as a public defender, which is also where I did my fellowship. And that was through Justice Catalyst. So I guess my fellowship year was 2018 and into 2019. I think now they're doing like a 1 year with a possibility of renewing for 2. It might have been that way when I did mine as well. And I applied for the fellowship while I was finishing up a clerkship. So it was from law school to clerkship to fellowship, the public defender's office to here. I think, should I wait to get more into the specifics about Justice Catalyst? Okay.
Yeah, that would be great, because we would like to hear from John quickly first.
Right.
John, welcome. Would you like to give us a little bit of information about the fellowship that you pursued and when you did it, sort of in the trajectory of your career?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. So I'm John Peng. I use he, him pronouns. I did a fellowship kind of straight out of law school. So this is in 2019. I did the Immigrant Justice Corps Fellowship, which is a 2-year fellowship for people just recently graduated, or again, most people apply as a 3L and then take the fellowship once upon graduation. It's a 2-year fellowship to get matched up with a immigrant nonprofit organization all throughout the country to be able to provide legal representation, and that takes kind of a myriad of forms, either in a lot of detention work, in removal defense, and then also in affirmative immigration assistance wherever kind of the need is.
Terrific. Thank you very much for that, John. I know we've had at least one, maybe two students now, I think, successfully obtain Immigrant Justice Corps fellowships. It's a great experience. So, Lauren, do you want to talk a little bit about, and I'm really curious about a couple of things, right? Because Equal Justice Works is a wonderful, wonderful place to look for fellowships. I've found in my experience in advising students that designing your own fellowship is a little bit intimidating. So can you talk us through that process and how you decide? Did you do a design your own fellowship? It sounds like you did, right? And how you decided to sort of pursue that as opposed to a more formulated fellowship?
I'm happy to answer this, and I think, Peter, you might have a very different answer, so I'd be interested in what you have to say too. But I knew what I was interested in doing and kind of the field that I'd wanted to go into. And then I got very terrified about student loans, and I ended up working for a firm, and quickly realized within about a month that that was not the right move for me. And so I started thinking about like what I actually wanted to do. And that was a really good moment. It was a really good inflection point because I got to really reassess about how I wanted to spend my time, and what I really wanted to be working on. Before law school, I'd been very involved in a lot of intimate partner violence work, particularly within the LGBTQ community. And that was one of the things that I had focused on in my first year of law school, and my first internship was at the Anti-Violence Project, which is an LGBTQ anti-violence organization in New York City that does a lot of work focused on serving survivors of intimate partner violence, hate violence, and sexual violence. And I reached out to my former supervisor there, who was the legal director, and was like, hey, can we talk about kind of like what you are seeing as far as what the need is in the community right now? Because what I really would like to do is I'd like to come back and do like an immigration focused fellowship serving particular needs of like what is relevant to the community right now. I have like my data, I have kind of like what I can get off of the available research of like what is the most kind of pressing need, and I can back that up with statistics, but that's not actually going to be reflective of like what your community is seeing. She was like, yes, absolutely, please come back, can I please hire you, let's do this. And it turned into a very collaborative process that was really informed by what the need was. And I think that that was something that was critical. I reached out in the late fall, early winter of the year before I applied. So we had like an entire 9 months of discussions before I actually submitted an application. And I think that that was important to have that back and forth to figure out what my interests were, what her interests, or what the need was, what the organization could support, and where I could kind of fit into existing programming and supplement that with my project. And I think that that came through in my application, and the thought came through in my application, and the fact that this was something that I really genuinely wanted to do. And so that was the kind of like planning process for me. Peter, what about you?
It was somewhat similar. I mean, I think part of what can seem so intimidating to a student considering fellowships is that it seems pretty widespread, this idea, and I shared it at some point, that you're supposed to just come up with some brilliant idea that's going to change a bunch of lives with your, whatever experiences you've had in law school and whatever you've brought from before, like you had, Lauren. But and then you're just, you kind of are able to parachute into some host organization and do great work. And that's overwhelming and probably almost never the way that it plays out, so it wasn't the way it played out for me. I mean, I knew I wanted to do work in the criminal legal system. I sort of I had public defender experience. I had experience in nonprofits doing civil impact litigation and other kind of work, but all targeted at the criminal system. And I was mostly applying to staff attorney positions. And then I talked to a friend who was at that point the litigation director of a public defender's office, who I had interned for. And he wanted to file bar complaints against DAs. And, in a lot of jurisdictions, there's pretty egregious misconduct happening on a regular basis. And so it seemed like I had talked with him and with other people about this idea generally. But so working with him and then working with some other people, I kind of built up a more robust version of that project that involved like tracking misconduct from public defender offices and doing trainings on misconduct and on how to respond to it in your litigation as a trial lawyer, and also outside of it through things like bar complaints, and then doing kind of media advocacy. And I approached Justice Catalyst with it. This was like pretty early on in the existence of that program, so things were less formal at that point, and it was more of a conversation. And then I developed, a written proposal and got it signed off. And then I kind of shopped that around to different offices. Few were willing to do it for various reasons relating to courage, or in some cases, genuine and well-founded fear and retaliation by prosecutors' offices, right? And I ended up landing in San Francisco for a variety of reasons. And I will say one thing, I had not actually worked closely with San Francisco to develop this. It was other offices, or one other office. And things changed when I kind of hit the ground. It looked different in some ways, in some big ways and more small ones than what I had envisioned, but that was fine. The project just kind of grew or adapted in response to what the existence of things on the ground there, and things that you can't really, like, I didn't have a ton of experience in a PD's office, and I had never been a line attorney before. So there were just aspects of the project that needed to look differently than I had conceived them, even having worked in conjunction with some public defenders. So I'll leave it there for now.
What is a line attorney?
When I say that, I'm referring to an attorney. I mean, I guess prosecutors would have the same thing, right? But in a trial attorney, basically, a trial attorney in a public defender's office or district attorney's office.
It's interesting because it sounds like we had kind of similar experiences in the formulation as ongoing discussions and iterative in some ways, but in kind of very different directions. But yeah, I was intimidated that I was going to have to like be this genius who is going to fix everything. And I think that I forgot that people realize that you're kind of like a brand new attorney, and they are interested in launching you. They're not interested in you being the savior of anything.
Yeah, and they're also like, I mean, we probably both have developed our thinking on this aspect, right? But like, the host organization is probably at least one level removed from the community who they are purporting to work on behalf of, right? And so you as the designer of a fellowship are in a step even further removed. Now, hopefully a good project maybe would have been informed by and have had conversation with those communities. But if not, I didn't really, right? So you at least need to be in deep conversation with the host organization or organizations like that one in the same category to be able to really get closer to addressing more directly or more effectively the needs of the community on whose behalf you want to do the work.
And I think, John, you might have a very different perspective because IJC fellows have it's so much more established, and you get the training that is designed to kind of serve you. I'm wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, hearing about your experiences is quite interesting. Yeah, I think you're right, Lauren. IJC kind of reverses that model a little bit, right? The idea is IJC vets out all these host organizations to try to make sure that when they make a match between a fellow and the host organization should know what to expect, right? That it's a kind of a eager but unexperienced attorney coming in that might be able to help them in their project in some way. And so most host organizations are asked to think critically about what that means to have a fellow in that environment and to be able to support the fellow to do good work. And so vice versa, right? The host organizations are probably also just expecting fellows that are coming in with the capacity, but then also just the interest to learn and grow in that role as a fellow. They know that it's technically time limited for 2 years, but many fellows stay on, right? So when host organizations are trying to pair up with a fellow, they are interested in longer term growth too, to say this could be a position where this fellow could grow into a permanent part of our staff and to expand our immigration practice.
So I know that IJC has a really structured training. I'm wondering if you can talk about that, and then also how you kind of independently grew what you were working on throughout the course of your fellowship.
Yeah, so IJC at orientation level, so this is probably a month before all the fellows kind of scatter out to around the country. Previously, it was all done in New York City. So when I did my orientation, it was in 2019 in New York City. And we all just kind of amassed there and then did these sessions. And it would be detailed sessions from practitioners in the field on a range of immigration topics that we would be expected to maybe come across or see. And so, for example, we would get trainings on removal defense, right? What it means to be able to represent someone in a setting where you have to be quick and you have to be kind of facing combative judges, especially during that time, during the Trump administration. And you would get trainings from a practice standpoint, but then also from just how to be a practitioner, right? What it means to step into the immigration landscape in the moments that we're facing. I mean, even right now, the immigration legal landscape is complicated and it is difficult to kind of step in and be prepared to take on all the challenges that come with it. And so I think the training is meant to give you just a framework and background of these topics that you might see. It's meant to give you just a resource bank, right? All the presentations, all the materials that go into it, so that you at least have something to go to if you face a question down the line, and then also to connect you with so many practitioners. I think one of the really nice things about the immigration practice field, we're all connected in a kind of national sense of being people willing to help and people willing to jump in and give you advice, give you feedback on how you can improve your own practice. And so the IJC Fellowship really just ties all those threads together and gives you a platform to build off of.
Can you talk about how you deviated from your set expectations throughout the course of your fellowship and what you did instead, or in addition to?
Yeah. So I was placed with Prisoners Legal Services of New York, here based in Albany and Buffalo, New York, in our immigration practice. Prisoners Legal Services provides immigration representation to people who are incarcerated throughout upstate New York, but then also people detained at the Buffalo Federal Detention Facility out in Batavia. And so as a kind of starting, I would say my first 6 months to a year, it was just being one of the staff attorneys that were handling these removal defense cases coming out of, again, the incarceration system. And then from there, for me, it was also just about once I started to get kind of my bearings and understood how to represent people, I wanted to pursue things in kind of the more federal space. I had been, attracted to doing more detention-based work, so habeas petitions to try to get people out of detention, to take on appeals, more complicated appeals up to the circuit level, to the point where I was able to get some experience arguing in front of the circuit courts, and a lot of it stems out of kind of one of the advantages or benefits of doing the fellowship meant I could kind of control, the things I was interested in. I wasn't hired as a staff attorney to prisoners' legal services, so so long as kind of IJC was supportive that the federal work would be compatible to what they thought my fellowship could look like, I could pitch it to them, and once they were supportive, it was much easier to go back to prisoners legal services to convince them to also let me take on some of this new work. And again, since then, I've stayed on with prisoners legal services past my fellowship in more of a federal practice role. And part of it was because I was able to almost demonstrate proof of concept during my fellowship to show them that, one, the work I was trying to take on is valuable, and two, that that I could do it, that I could manage kind of a federal docket for us, and that there was going to be some benefit to the organization for me doing so.
Well, and also you have single-handedly changed the landscape of habeas litigation and law in the Western District. So if you Google, or if you go into Westlaw and search for John Peng, or really just search habeas out of the Western District, it's just like John Peng, which is delightful when you're like, oh, I found a great case that I can cite, and then you look and you're like, oh no, that is one of the cases that John already gave me as a template for this.
I think that is way too much credit that I'm due, but I appreciate it.
It's not, it's just accurate. But I think what I'm hearing is for me, and then for Peter and for you too, John, is just the amount of flexibility, and the amount of responsiveness that it is kind of part of the fellowship process. I think that there were times when I felt very limited by what I could do because I had kind of tied myself to certain deliverables that before I kind of really understood what the 2 years was going to look like. And I think I wish that there was more flexibility in the way that it was structured internally so that you could change those deliverables more easily. And I think it sounds like, John, you might have had a different experience, but I think for Equal Justice Works, it was more difficult to kind of have those modifications along the way. Not that it was impossible, but we were more closely tied to what we had kind of anticipated doing. But I think that also goes back to kind of the planning process. And I think that there are ways to plan in that flexibility. And I think that it might make sense to kind of talk a little bit about just kind of the time frame, because the time frame I don't know when you really started thinking about it, John, but for me, I wasn't tied to the school year anymore, and I had that flexibility, but I still think I don't know when I would have started applying and thinking about this if I was still in school, because it seems like it's too early, and then all of a sudden it seems like it might be too late. I'm wondering if you have any perspectives on that, John.
Yeah, I think my time frame I think my experience for law school was a lot of ruling out of what I kind of found out I wasn't interested in, right? And so my 1L summer was very much figuring out that I wasn't really interested in big law and going to a big firm kind of out of law school. And so, okay, so then now I was going into my 2L trying to figure out what exactly I wanted to do. 2L summer, same kind of thing. I did a internship with the Judge Advocate General Court. Good experience, but then also started realizing, okay, that isn't what I want to do after graduating as well. And I would say that was probably, so coming out of the internship, so somewhere in the early August, middle of August, about to start 3L was when I really started to catch up or learn about fellowships, and just at least get a sense of the timelines. And so the Immigrant Justice Corps Fellowship application, I think is currently open right now for 3Ls. But it runs, I want to say, until at least September, October. And so it was kind of putting together my application in time for the deadline, and then realizing that, so at least the fellowships I was looking at, kind of in the mold of IJC, those seem to have run earlier, right, in 3L, in kind of by the first, by the fall of 3L. And then my kind of backup or thoughts were I could still go into the spring if I applied to more just staff attorney positions that might be out there, and kind of go from there. And fortunate enough, I was able to get the IJC fellowship, and that kind of solves some of my problems.
Yeah, I think applying my time frame to the school year, I would have started my conversations like probably midway through my first semester of 2L, fall semester of 2L. That's probably kind of where it would start. Peter, what about you? I know that Justice Catalyst has become a very different fellowship than it was when you had one, but do you have a sense of like kind of when you would start thinking about different points and working on things? Like, when would you recommend like reaching out to potential host organizations or start having those conversations about what a fellowship would look like?
I can say I checked my email to see when I first reached out, and it was August for a fellowship that for me needed to start in April, I think is like when I was targeting. But yeah, I don't know, as early as you have capacity for, I guess, right?
And that was before they had like a formal process or formal deadlines, do you know?
Yeah, I don't think it either wasn't yet formal, or it was newly enough formal that I was able to kind of apply outside of that. One thing that I think is nice about the way they do things, and I did confirm recently that they still do this because I was talking with somebody who's considering applying, is that they have applicants or whatever fill out a prospectus. So just kind of a much shorter version of a full-blown application. And so that they can gauge interest, and they might tell you like, this really isn't the sort of thing we're looking for, or we'd be interested, but what if you tweak this and tweak that? Or we would want to see like a component on the data tracking piece or something, or making this something that can be replicated in other jurisdictions, things of that sort. A couple other things I would add just generally though, if this is a good time for that. I think it's really difficult to walk a line here when you get to the organization between wanting to kind of stay true to your vision of the project, wanting to be responsive to the organization's understanding of what the needs of the client base are, possibly wanting to do what the organization wants you to do in order to curry favor for a staff attorney position at the end of your fellowship. And those are all going to be case by case, but I would encourage people to, understand that like mostly these organizations want your labor there, right? They want people to pay for you, other people to pay for you to come do their work and help them do their work. So you have some real leverage. And though I failed to do this, they basically laughed when I told them, I will bring this if you guarantee that you'll hire me as a staff attorney after, barring like any sort of total failure to perform or something. Like, no. It's a very competitive office. And so that when I told other people later that I had done that, they thought it was hilarious. But it's worth a shot. They weren't like, no, and also now we don't want you to come do this free work for 2 years. They were like, no, but come on, you're still coming. And I did. So don't, understand that as an applicant, you have some real leverage. And then with respect to like the project evolving and stuff, again, I think some of that's probably important that it does happen. It would be a little strange if it looked on the ground exactly as it did on paper or in your head. But also be protective of the core thing that you're trying to do. Like I could have easily allowed the office to break me up into pieces and have me do all these different things that they have fellows and law clerks and whatever doing. I did some of it. I did a handful of things that were outside the scope of totally unrelated to the project, because they were really beneficial to me personally in my growth as an advocate. So just be thoughtful, I guess, about that risk as well.
And I think that's a risk that you're going to face in, in a lot of different roles too. I also had some things that I did outside the scope of my fellowship that I probably, like, in retrospect shouldn't have done, because it was like on the line of like whether it was permitted under the fellowship rules. But at the end of the day, I was really glad that I did them, because it was actually really furthering the purpose of my fellowship. And that was really important to me. And I had a really big impact with that work. I think like what I'm hearing though is like, I think that there's so much opportunity, and I see like a lot of staff attorney positions, and staff attorney positions are great, and you can do a lot of this in a staff attorney position. You can do a lot of this in different roles, and also the support and training and the cohort that I got out of the fellowship was really, really important, in a way that I wouldn't have had if I had only been in the staff attorney position, because I did have that kind of like external connection that did give me a little bit more flexibility in my role at my host organization to kind of do more of what I wanted. And then also, like, I still am in connection and in contact with a lot of the people who are doing similar projects. We, in Equal Justice Works, you kind of like get broken out in like a cohort of similarly situated projects. And so I am still in contact with a lot of the people who are doing immigration work. I was at a conference in Boston earlier this spring, and I like looked across the room, and I just like looked at this person I know, and I was like, oh my gosh, here she is. And it was just like fun to kind of like look across the room and see like so many of the people who have been in my cohort be in that room, be having really interesting conversations about the way that we are kind of like navigating immigration in the world right now in a kind of liberation-based ethic. And I think that those connections have been really important to building and furthering my career, and helping both like me and the people I serve further kind of have a broader network of support. And so that's actually been very helpful to me recently when I've been kind of trying to find some connections around different referrals, just to have that broader network of people doing similar work. I kind of went off on a tangent there that I hadn't intended to, but yeah, I know that IJC does that too. I don't know how you feel about, I don't know if you had a similar experience, John.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I think I agree kind of wholeheartedly with all that you said. I think that's one of the probably the strengths of IJC is that network, and because IJC, so IJC one has been expanding a lot, from even when I came on. I want to say I was probably the 5th cohort of IJC fellows. So that was 2019. We had a cohort of about 30. This year, the incoming fellowship class is going to be a cohort of 90, I want to say, or 80, something like 88 to 90. And so IJC has been very intentional about one, making sure kind of the funding base is there, but then two, being able to get more host organizations and put fellows more into positions that they are interested in, right? So I know now, maybe when I was going through the matching process, there were probably fewer geographical locations, but now it really is the full gamut of needs. And so people that are interested in doing border work, for example, have a host of selection along the border with organizations in Texas and New Mexico and Arizona, California, right? And so that continues to build, and that connection, what Lauren pointed to, has been really critical for me too, right? Because now, so I work in upstate New York, but we have people that get brought up from the border, and it's always a very easy starting point for me to reach out to IJC fellows working along the border to just give me like the quick rundown of what exactly is happening, what are they seeing, why are we seeing so many transfers coming up from the border, and it just kind of jumpstarts what I would want to do or need to do to be able to assist the people that come up. And I think it also is very impactful from a career standpoint, right? I think once you get more into the practice and into your careers, you start finding out how small the circles are, and you are just going to have, this person that you know of, and then once you connect, you're able to learn about what they're doing, and then that certainly helps for any future kind of jobs and thinking through your own career about where you want to develop. I feel like I could probably do that if I decided I wanted to pick up right now, go to some, other corner of the country and say, I want to continue doing immigration work. I probably could identify a couple of IJC fellows that would be willing to chat with me and just give me a leg up when I'm doing that job.
There's on the EJW website, there's like a menu of like everybody with their like face at the time that they did their fellowship, which we've all aged very quickly. And then also the project, and it's interesting to kind of like look and see, where people are now and then where kind of they started from in that trajectory. And people are always really happy to talk about their experience, especially around like fellowships. So if you are interested in a particular area and you go and you see that there's somebody that you idolize or you think is cool and has a cool career, and they did a fellowship, like reach out to them. People love talking about themselves. I was gonna say something. I can't remember what it was. It's the second time I've forgotten it, so it'll come back.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
One thing that is really interesting to me, and I'm learning a lot from all of you, so thank you, is that it seems like each of you at least gained a little bit of insight into sort of what your core interests were early enough so that you could frame these fellowships. And or it sounds like you had connections within, I think, Lauren, you said within your host organization. So I'm just curious about what your recommendations are for law students in terms of how important is it that they clearly identify what they're passionate about in terms of the issues and grow their network in those spaces early on in their law school career?
I'll answer that, and then I can, if anybody else has thoughts, I'm sure you do. I think that you will have to be able to articulate an interest in the project and why you want to do it. Especially if you're designing your own, because otherwise, one of the things that the people who are assessing them are going to look at is kind of like, do you actually want to do this? Is this something that you care about? So I think that is something that is important to be able to articulate. Does it have to be your like one and only true love? No, it does not. Right. Like, but I think that it is important to be able to articulate why you are interested in doing something and why you care about it. And if you are able to make like a a solid connection with your own experience. I think that that's important. I think that there are ways that it can look, at least for me, a bit distasteful in how you're presenting it. But there are, because I think it can kind of like lean into like selling yourself a bit, but that's also something that unfortunately you have to do a lot for funding. That brings me to one of the things that I did want to say is that doing fellowship applications is really great practice for getting funding down the road and asking for funding. It has all the things that you need to like get grants, to like do pitches. It is really, really good experience. And you can also, you can and should apply to as many fellowships as you can if you are interested in doing like a design, like self-designed fellowship. There are a bunch. And there's no reason that you shouldn't apply for multiple ones. So going back to your question, Mary, I think that it is important, but I don't think that it is, I don't think that it is absolutely necessary to like be able to demonstrate that it's the only thing you're interested in. I do think that you do want to start making connections if you are interested in fields that you think you might want to explore after law school, because that's going to help you figure out if that is something that you want to pursue. Talking to people is really key in figuring out what that life actually looks like, what the issues are, and whether that is something that you want to have as part of your career. And then two, people really like to help you. People will want to put you in connection with other folks. I've pretty much never had reached out to somebody to like try to network and been disappointed or turned down. People really like to help, especially young attorneys who are interested in similar things that they're interested in. And it can be really intimidating, and I hate doing it still, but it's really helpful. And people are actually very nice most of the time. That's my answer. Peter, what do you think?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. As somebody who went back to school and then to law school much later than most people, I'm sympathetic to the difficulty in identifying the core issues that one cares about in any sort of reasonable time frame, but once you get to law school and you're about to kind of take that step, it's obviously worth, I think, doing some work to try to figure out what those things are. It's hard. There are only so many opportunities to kind of get impressions of these different issue areas. If you don't come in to law school knowing you want to be an immigrant rights attorney or a public defender or whatever. So you try to get those experiences, try to identify what those core issues, or at least some of those issues could be, like mine is, mostly this space, the criminal legal system stuff, but within that, there's a lot of room, I think. I mean, I'm now doing this clinical teaching thing, having done the trial attorney thing and then the fellowship thing before that. And each is vastly different, though all kind of centered in that one space. And then, I don't know, I won't say much more than you did, Lauren, about the networking thing, but I agree. It's important. Like so many of the opportunities I've had have been from I think everyone probably has been from connections. I can trace it back to having had a good relationship with my public interest director at our law school, who sent me an application before posting it to the board. And I ended up doing that for my 1L summer. And through the person I interned for there, I met the guy who would eventually help me take this project to the public defender's office in San Francisco, where I would then work for 5 years, So talk to your supervisors, meet other people at the offices you work at who are doing cool things or who seem like they're, interesting or whatever. And that will probably pay off down the line in terms of your own kind of professional development.
And I want to just put in a word there of I did not know a single lawyer when I applied to law school. I do not have any legal connections. And I don't consider myself a well-connected person. But I have built a web of connections. And it's much easier to do than I think I thought it would be. People are much more welcoming. So it's awful to go ask somebody to go have coffee and talk about their career with you. And also it is going to be so helpful, and they will always remember you for asking them to go get coffee with you. Yeah. What do you think, John?
Yeah, I think my add-on, and maybe this is a slight twist to your question, Mary. I think I would put in a plug for clinical programs, right? And least of which because I admire a ton the work that Lauren and Professor Sarah Rogerson does with the immigration clinic. And so I say that just my personal experience going to the clinical programs, getting a chance to actually practice law, right? Not just think of law in this kind of conceptual sense, was what probably led me to do the fellowship, and then to also understand this is where I thought I could, one, bring value, but then also what I would feel most, most fulfilled by coming out of law school. And it was being able to work with people, right? Like I got a chance to say, okay, now I understand I'm going to law school so that I add a tool to my toolbox to be able to work with people who, don't have that opportunity to gain an understanding of the law. I think that also maybe probably helped me in the fellowship application process itself, because for me, coming out of law school, it was just I knew I had some interest in immigration. I don't think I was tied down to immigration, but that's kind of where my experience was. And then it was knowing that almost any skill I could gain out of law school would be a positive one, right? Like I come into direct services, I'm gaining some skills, right? To just constantly go into court, work on my trial skills. That's probably not where I find myself most comfortable or what my favorite part of practicing law is, but I gained so many valuable skills, right? How to just interact with clients, how to be able to just manage my tasks, because I had 25 cases running at a time, right? So all of these were just valuable skills that I was able to gain through the fellowship process, and then it becomes so much easier, right? Once you're in your fellowship, in your first job out of law school, you start being able to then identify, okay, so for me, it was identifying the federal work, identifying the appellate work, right? These are more legal practice skills that I really want to develop, and I have a keen interest in. How do I now start moving towards that, right? It wasn't like I needed to solve all of it. Coming out of law school, picking the fellowship, it was get me into the fellowship first, and then from there I could really build and figure out where I wanted to go.
And if you come to the immigration law clinic, you can get connected to wonderful people like John Peng.
Well, I see that it is about 10 to 5, and I want to give students the opportunity to ask questions. Would any of our students like to unmute and ask a question, or post it in the chat? I guess you all have been so comprehensive in your covering of fellowships that everyone has the information they need. I did drop a few links into the chat for students, links to each of the fellowship programs that were mentioned in today's program, and then a link to psjd.org, which is a great place to search for fellowships in case you're interested in other topics or just want to, as Lauren recommended, sort of apply broadly. Any parting words? Oh, thank you. Thank you, Shanice.
In the spirit of networking, feel free to share my email with any interested students who want to talk about fellowships or any of the work I've done or anything like that.
What is your best email? Can you put it in the chat?
Yeah.
Thank you to everyone for joining. Thank you so much, Mary. please, if you are interested in applying for fellowships, please do reach out to me. I know some of you know where I live in the law school. But please reach out to me. My email address, I'm gonna pop it in the chat here. I'm being attacked by my dog right now. Excuse me, but I'm sorry. I have to finish it. But please do stop by, email me. I'd be delighted to talk to you about any part of the fellowship process. And if you have any friends who are interested in applying for fellowships or curious about what that looks like, I'm happy to talk to them as well. Yeah.
Thank you
fun.
very much.
Thank you for having us, Mary. I really
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all. This was wonderful. I learned a ton. I'm sure our students did too. So have a wonderful evening. I hope for any of you in the Albany area, I hope you get out and enjoy this weather because, you know, soon it'll be dark at 4 o'clock. So have a great afternoon, everyone. A great weekend.
Thank you. You too.
Yeah.
Take care. Bye-bye.